coming in, you will see that the website is up. You will see that the website is up. Please feel free to be reminded to take your post-session surveys today, as well as your post-institute survey. You will be able to come to the site to download that information. You will also be able to receive that information and take those surveys directly from your app. So we want to ensure that we do that. We want to ensure that we did what we needed to do in providing you with the information that you need to become an exemplary school district, to become a school district that is ensuring that the history of African peoples and African American contributions to this society is being embedded into our curriculums in the school districts here in the state of Florida. So thank you for coming to be armed and equipped to get that information. We're going to get going pretty quickly today because we have a very robust agenda. So we're asking that you take out your tablets to take notes, your pen, your paper, whatever you need. So you know I already have a question. You know I have a question for you to chat about. We want you to give us one word of how you're feeling this moment at the closing session of the historic 2020 Summer Virtual Institute of the African American History Task Force. And so we want you to text us or chat us that one word. Are you ready? Are you ready? And joining us this morning already on the screen, we have, of course, history herself, Dr. Bernadette Kelly, who has been working with this institute for over 20 years, her brainchild, her passion, her purpose, in addition with all the many things that she's doing across this country. So thank you, Dr. Kelly, for your insight, your wisdom, and your impact that you may have made on history and you will continue to make. We have one of our featured presenters, Dr. Andrea Oliver. You will meet her yourself in about 4 minutes. Dr. Kelly has me on the time clock today, so she won't unleash me. So she already told me, Roxy, calm down, let's get it going. But y'all know at some point I might unleash. It is the last day, just saying. All right, so we have Dr. Oliver, and then we have Dr. Tamara Gibson Alonso. She's been with us every day. She kicked us off with that inspirational and informative message on how we're going to deal with health and wellness in this moment of crisis. And so thank you, Dr. Gibson Alonso, and thank you so much for being a participant every single day. We appreciate your diligence to this event. Dr. Madiune, who will be joining us again on today to share with us some important artifacts in history as it relates to art in the museum history and artifacts that impacts, once again, your education and curriculum in your classroom. And we have the exciting and energized Dr. Donna Austin, and she'll be joining us again today as we're looking at that criteria. That's the purpose. That's what we're here for. And so in order for us to ensure that we are meeting the necessary steps and requirements, Dr. Austin, I think in her own energizing, powered up way, is going to just refresh our memory on those standards. And of course, the chairman of this particular task force, Senator Tony Hill, who has left and is making his footprint on this state. He will give us his closing words as we close out the conference at the end. We will also be joined by Dr. Rudy Jameson here very shortly, who is going to have some exciting guests for us. So we will be hearing from one of the guests we will be hearing from is Mr. Rodney Hurst. And we know that he's been all over the news and as we're talking about some of the things that are going on in our country. And Dr. Jameson will be interviewing Mr. Hurst live with us on today. So this will be a power-packed event today. Everything that we do is purposed to impact how we teach our students. Does that make sense? If you understand that, when I say get it, you say got it. Do you get that? If I say get it, you say got it. Chat me. It's about interacting and impacting education in your classroom. So that is the goal. It is 9:04, Dr. Kelly, and we're now going to introduce to some and present to others Dr. Andrea Oliver in her own way. Thank you, Dr. Oliver.
All right, thank you very much. And I would like to first of all say good morning. Again, just to sort of echo and piggyback upon what everybody has been saying thus far about the energy of this conference. I'm also the evaluator for the outside evaluator and have been in that role now since 2017. And I'm not just saying this to butter you guys up, but this 2020 session is by far the most engaging one that I've had an opportunity to actually witness. I was getting some chatter about not being able to be seen. Can y'all see me now? Okay, great. With that being said, I'm a woman of faith, and I have to just say this real quickly. I wouldn't be the educator that I am today. I started in education 25 years ago this August. I know that's hard to believe. I was a child prodigy. I started teaching at 13, let's just say that. But I'm coming up on my 25th year in education, and I wouldn't be the educator that I am today were it not for a young lady who I'm privileged to have on the call joining us in the person of Miss Althoria Pickett. She was actually my mentor teacher, my very first teaching assignment that I had as an 8th grade teacher when I didn't look much more like a student myself, teaching 8th grade history at Swift Creek Middle School right here in Tallahassee, Florida. I have since gone on to go up to the college level, which some days can still be, resemble a middle school classroom in a lot of ways. But at any rate, I just wanted to publicly give her a shout out and to thank her for all that she put in me to make me the educator that I am today. And that is very much of an Afrocentric principle. It is incumbent upon us veteran teachers to reach out there and help our more novice brothers and sisters in the trenches. So if you've gotten one thing from me today, then just take that little nugget of wisdom and encouragement along with you. Because that being said, I'm going to actually get into, as I set up my screen share, what the actual presentation that I will be sharing with you today is going to be all about. Here I am. We're talking about building bridges. Now, who knew that in a social studies driven curriculum, such as what we tend to typically associate African American histories with, the social studies curriculum, that we could actually be talking about building bridges? Because typically when we think of building bridges, we think of it within the context of STEM. But if you think about bridges within the concept of the rough acronym that I came up with, which is building relevant intergenerational experience through civic engagement, I want to just share with you for the next few minutes of experiences that I've had in training pre-service teachers to become more culturally competent in their classroom practices through something called service learning. So for those of you who have been around the profession for a while, service learning is not necessarily new, but we're going to be talking about it, as it says here in our session objectives, how service learning projects can be adapted to satisfy the requirements of Florida Statute 1003.42. Primarily, we're going to be looking at oral history projects specifically, in which I will share with you a couple of samples of student work that was produced for me in classes that I've taught here at TCC that you can then take for ideas and inspiration. And while you are looking at that, to consider how implementing a service learning project within your own discipline, even with younger children, can also fit within the dictates of the Florida statute, which the task force here is charged with the responsibility of overseeing its implementation. We're going to explore some relevant research on active learning's links to student achievement. This can also be a data generating exercise for your practice, and the related research that shows the benefits of how multi-generational interactions is in and of itself a culturally responsive practice. So what is service learning? Service learning is an educational approach that combines learning objectives with community service in order to provide a pragmatic, progressive learning experience while meeting societal needs. The diagram that you see here projected to your right shows you pretty much the different components of the service learning definition provided to us courtesy of edutopia.com. There are 5 stages of service learning. There's an investigative part, a preparation part, an action part, a reflection part, and that's reflection on the part of both you and your students. And then there's the demonstration and evaluation. And that to me can be the most interesting component of all these 5 stages, because that is the product that you're having them produce for you. In the case of, say, like an oral history, that is the result of the research and the time spent in gathering that oral history that they're then going to be sharing and turning into you. Within the science classroom, that demonstration might be a beach cleanup or leading a campaign on environmental justice as it relates to environmental racism, which is a topic of big discussion now going on, especially when you consider incidences such as the Flint water crisis. There's something that, you know, science teachers might want to take into account and consider. Service learning, in my view, takes the classroom out into the real world. Now, having been a teacher and am still a teacher, actually, just at the college level, you're consistently confronted with questions from your students. You know, why do I have to learn this? Where am I going to use this in the real world? And so service learning gives you an opportunity for students, show them how what they're learning in the classroom does have real world application. Also, depending on how you structure that service learning experience, you are providing students with an avenue and an opportunity to build and develop critical interpersonal skills. They have to learn how to work in a team. And again, I will speak more specifically to that experience in some of the examples I'll be sharing with you this morning. Benefits for faculty. You know, it gives you an opportunity, aside from enhancing your own teaching quality, an outlet for your professional expertise. Going back to my science teachers that I might have out there, you might personally and academically have had an interest in environmental science. Maybe you were a biology teacher or rather a biology major or a marine biology major in college, let's say. You can structure a service learning experience for your students that's reflective of your interest. And that's not always something you get to do if you follow, you know, the standard textbook-based curriculum. And it can be an innovative way to meet required state standards. As far as the contracted constituencies, this refers to the agencies or the populations or the demographics with which your students are interacting. In the case of the examples I'll be sharing with you this morning, those human interactions actually fall on opposite ends of the age demographic spectrum. On one end, you have older people, yet on the other side, you have younger people. And depending on the level of the students that you work with, say high school students working with elementary students, or elementary students interacting with older people, depending on how you structure that experience so that it's appropriate for the setting in which you teach in, either way, there are positive human interactions that will facilitate emotional and mental health for all parties who are involved in that experience. So, taken from a position paper on civic education, which the position paper that I'm referencing here, I actually did post in the Whova app earlier this week. It is my understanding that not everyone has access to that app, so I will be asking the organizers to make all documents that I shared within that app also available on the website. I'm sure that won't be a problem. But according to that position paper, the goal of schooling is not merely preparation for citizenship, but citizenship itself, to equip a citizenry with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions needed for active and engaged civic life. That is what the whole tenor of this conference has been, has it not? Civic engagement. And no other subject area is better suited to achieve this essential goal in schools than the social studies, which I can remember even as far back as the 90s, that discipline feeling like the redheaded stepchild because it wasn't math and it wasn't language arts and it wasn't an academic discipline that got tested. Now, in the years since my leaving the classroom, I do and am aware that there are end of course exams now for both civics and American history. So because it's a tested discipline, and unfortunately we're in a state here in Florida where things are very much test driven, it does get a little bit more attention. But I think in light of recent events, the whole thrust to have a more civically educated citizenry is something that we can definitely take advantage of. But here's what I say about it. Service learning promotes active and engaged citizenship, period. It is citizenship in action. It is where classroom learning meets the real world. So to answer those questions we get from students all the time, where are we going to get to use this in the real world? Well, how about you do that within the context of what a real world fill in the blank as to whatever academician you're speaking of, whether it's a scientist, whether it's a historian, or whether it is a mathematician. What do those people in those professions, what is it that they actually do with the content knowledge they get in the classroom? Now, to make this more applicable to the Task Force Institute, which we're all participating in at this very moment, this is actually taken, this is language actually taken from the statute language. It says here that history of African Americans, including the history of African people before the political conflicts that led to development of slavery, the passage to America, the enslavement experience, abolition, and watch this now, watch what's highlighted here, the contributions of African Americans to society. And then the next thing that's followed by is instructional material shall include the contributions of African Americans to American society. Historians actually develop instructional materials through our research, through our scholarly synthesis. We develop instructional materials that in the case of this statute compels us to focus on the contributions of African Americans to American society. Why not turn that around on the students and make them the creators and the generators of instructional material? Now, where do they get the ingredients with which to bake up instructional materials that reflect service learn or that reflect the dictates of the statute? Oral histories. Oral histories are one of the best primary sources that one can access in the study of history. It provides, it complements the study of history, it rounds out the study of history by interjecting the contemporaneous voices of people who were actually there and had firsthand knowledge of the things that your students read about in their textbooks. You see, it's one thing to read about Dr. King, it's one thing to watch a documentary on Rosa Parks, but it's another thing to talk to somebody who actually lived in Montgomery, Alabama in the mid-1950s, who remembers having to walk 6 miles one way to her job in the household of a white person as a domestic. She had to walk 6 miles to her job from her home and then 6 miles back again during the time the bus boycott was going on. The feelings that she had, whether or not she even realized the impact that she was having on the world around her. That is, I mean, when history is told as the stories, the collection of stories that they actually are, we find that students have an interest. But not only that, the collection of these oral histories are vitally important because as we enter into the, what is this, the fourth, going into the third decade rather of the 21st century, a lot of people with living, breathing memories of pivotal events from the 20th century are beginning to leave us. No need to, I'm not trying to bring you down or zap your energy or kill your vibe this morning, but the fact of the matter is we are starting to lose a number of people who bore witness to the era of Jim Crow and increasingly the era, that bridge era, I call it, that era between when the Civil Rights Act got passed and when desegregation actually started in the mid to late 1960s through the mid 70s, we're starting to lose those people too. And if we don't get these stories down, we will lose them forever. Why not enlist a core of willing students who need to hear this stuff because they don't necessarily talk to grandma or they don't necessarily take what granddad says seriously. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox there. Here at TCC, we offer, I'm proud to say, we offer each semester, including the summer semesters, 4 sections of African American history, which has an enrollment annually of anywhere between 100 to 125 students. TCC is the primary 2-year transfer, or a lot of our students were the 2-year stop on their way to their transfer to either Florida State or Florida A&M University. Florida A&M University actually has a requirement that they mandate all their students have African American history before they graduate. So a lot of our students who are en route to FAMU, have to take the class for that reason. But in the years since I've been here at TCC, going all the way back to 2006, when I first started teaching African American history, we only offered 1 section during the fall and spring semesters. And I've grown that to now 4 classes, fall, spring, and summer. And I'm proud to say we attract a diverse range of students. Not every student who takes this class is African American. And I don't know why I felt like I needed to say that, but there was this fear amongst some in the administration that if we expanded the course offerings, that it would only, the perception would be that only some students would take it. Well, that hasn't been our experience at all. The other thing that I am proud to say though, however, is that while we attract a number of students who are majoring in everything from nursing to business to marketing to computer science, just because they have an interest and a desire to want to learn more about what they feel like they didn't get prior to coming to college, the #1 majors who come into the African American history classes that I teach at TCC are, I should say, the elementary, those who are majoring in elementary education. And so I just want to congratulate or applaud the colleges of education we work the most closely with here at TCC, FAMU, Florida State, and Flagler College. In all 3 of those colleges, there is an insistence that their transfer students who are majoring in education get really well-versed in American history, including African American history. So long story short here, I see a lot of students who come through my program who are actually going to be in the classrooms within the next 3 to 4 years. So that's something that I take a lot of heart in. So I want to talk first about the oral history program or assignment. It's not something I do every semester. And I imagine it would have been really tough to have pulled this assignment off last spring or spring of 2020. So I'm kind of glad that, this was not a required assignment this past semester because of everything that went on. But the last time that this assignment was given was back in the spring of 2019. And it was at that juncture that we had over 75 students collecting the stories of 45 people ages 60 and above on their experiences and their remembrances of pre-civil rights era America. Although the requirement was that they could have interviewed people as young as 60, it turns out that the average age of our interviewees was actually 81 and a half. Also, we were actually able to poll or collect the histories of both African Americans and white Americans from all over the state of Florida and indeed from all over the country. What students then had to do with the histories that they collected is they had to produce miniature documentaries using the video production software of their choice. Now, I'm going to speak to the whole tech issue because I know some of you are already sort of maybe psychologically freaking out about that part, but you will be amazed at what these students know and can do. And I'll speak to that just later. I'm going to keep going here. The students worked in teams of 2 or 3. And the way that I compose the teams, of course, you can adapt this method however it would make sense for you to do so in your classes. But how I composed my classes or my teams within my classes was that it was based on attendance records. So I grouped students with similar attendance records. Maybe they knew these students, maybe, beforehand, maybe they didn't. But I found that the attendance-based grouping worked very well. It tended to cut down or keep group conflict to a minimum, particularly as it relates to workload and things of that nature, because you tended to get your more serious students in one cohort. Those who were less serious or would end up even dropping the class eventually, they tended to work in a group. So their poor work habits didn't have a bearing on people whose work habits were better. I used this project in lieu of a conventional written final exam. I think in the K-12 world, at least the last I was a part of it, there was this real big push for authentic assessments. I'm not sure if that's something that is still being promoted as heavily as I know it once was, once upon a time. But this is definitely an example of an authentic assessment. Now we're being encouraged to embrace that at the college level. And so I made this a capstone project. This was a project that was assigned to them at the beginning of the semester, and they had pretty much the whole rest of the semester with which to work on it. As I go to the next slide here, I'm showing you here actual language taken from my syllabus. Again, at your level, you would adapt it accordingly. But at my level, we of course use syllabi. And this was actual language taken from the syllabus where I made clear what it was that they were doing and how it was going to get done. So, even giving them this in writing, I actually devoted class time to going over it. And I also, in my case, enlisted the help of a reference librarian who here at TCC are assigned by discipline. So each discipline has its own research librarian. So I enlisted the assistance of the social science / history reference librarian and had her come in and do a presentation on information literacy and how they needed to, databases that they could use to find background and context, to set their oral histories within its proper context, what kind of databases they would use to find vetted information to help them with that. We also here on campus had what was called digital literacy skills. I actually have a very funny meme I'm going to be sharing at the end of this presentation because we find that students know all about how to make TikTok videos, but ask them to do something related to academics, to put some of that technical prowess to use in an academic setting. They want to, you know, play like they're all thumbs. So I'm actually going to be addressing that a little bit later on as well. But those were, or I think it is critically important when you do an assignment like this to make your expectations clear. The clearer you are from the outset, the less problems, it's been my experience, that you will have over the course of that project. I want to just say to you as well, I built up a bank of resources that I shared on the Whova app. And once again, if you've not been able to access that app, I will make sure with the organizers, through the organizers of this session, that that information is made available to you via the website as well. This is one of the things I shared. This was the grading rubric that I used. Again, depending on the level you teach, of course, you would modify accordingly. But again, I shared this with them at the outset. Okay, this is how you're going to be graded. Okay, so that they're clear on what the expectations were going to be. Now, even though I work with college students, I found that it was better to set them up for success when they did these oral histories. And just so you know, I gave them the option of speaking to people who they knew, but in the event, because, you know, I deal with a lot of, you know, late teens, early 20-somethings. Well, Dr. Oliver, you know, I really don't know anybody older than my mama. And you're like, well, how old is your mama? And they're like 40, and they're like 18. So you're like, okay, no, you can't talk to your mama, baby. But because they're from, you know, they may be up here going to school, you know, out of Dade County or Broward County, but they're up here for school. So they don't, and you know, I used to be really cynical about that. You don't know anybody, but some people, you know, some students really don't know anybody or have anybody in that world. I developed relationships with some of our local senior centers, some of our local veteran centers, and these are some suggestions that you too can use in your own communities. Churches are also excellent resources to turn to, and you'll be surprised if you approach these agencies and organizations and tell them what it is you're looking to do. There will be people just lining up. And again, this has been my experience. Hey, I have young people, they're looking for people to talk to so that they can collect oral histories. Even within your own school setting, how about have them talk to the older lunchroom lady who maybe this is her second career. Maybe she was, before becoming the lunchroom lady, maybe she had an amazing career in the military. But you will never know that because she's the lunchroom lady who passes out the milk, right? So, you know, I just wanted to say that. I did give them the option of talking to older relatives if older relatives were willing and accessible to them. In the event, however, I had to assist them in finding a subject. These were some of the sources that I used to find them people to talk to. Beyond that, I did have a list of prepared questions, which is in the resource packet that I've made available. My college was insistent upon, you know, getting their permission to be taped or recorded. You know, that may or may not be a requirement where you are, but I find that it's a good practice. You can never be too careful. So I do have a release or a permission form that I asked them to sign. And most people are understanding and are cool with that. I also provided them with something called the subject biographical data form because in the list of questions that I provide them, I don't necessarily need them to capture on tape when their subject was born. That's something, you know, mundane details like that. We capture on this subject biographical data form so that the questions we ask are more substantive and can lead them to a deeper understanding of the times in which their subject lived. Okay, so what was the result? I have 2 clips that I'm going to share. I'm not going to show them in their entirety, but this first example on the left is a local physician here by the name of Adam Brickler, who, if I'm not mistaken, was either the first or one of the first African-American physicians to have admitting privileges here in Tallahassee to the local hospital. So he was a trailblazing OBGYN who just retired from his practice in 2019 at the age of 90. And so I had a student group who actually had an inroads into talking to him. And this same student group used her grandma, the lady that you see, the young lady that you see pictured here, who lives now in Jacksonville, who I believe she said was originally from New York, who moved down to Florida in the 1950s, right around the time that all the turmoil was starting to happen with the civil rights movement. So we'll just see a brief clip from this video.
He's 69. I thought it was only about 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
Time goes so quickly, you know.
Yeah.
Segregation in the South was rigid, but there was segregation in the North, and where you had to know where to stop and where not to stop. There are many tales that we could tell about incidences that happened along those ways.
Linda Pittman was originally born in New York State. I moved to Florida when I was 13 years old. My father was in the military. He was stationed in Jacksonville. So we moved from a very small town in New York State to a big city, Jacksonville, Florida.
Well, I spent my early years in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it was there was absolutely no integration. It was completely separate. Everything was separate. And it made it pretty nice for us because my father was teaching at Johnson C.
School, a teacher asked me a question and I answered her, yes. And she said, yes what? And I said, yes. And she said, yes what? And by this time, she's right up in my face. I know none of these people. It's my first day in the school. And she gets right down in my face at my desk and said, you say yes ma'am to me. And I said, yes ma'am.
Adam Street that you just
one of my first
probably came down was clay when I came. When I went up to the old Capitol building to look around just to sightsee a little bit, there was this fountain. One side of the fountain was marked white, the other side was marked colored, which meant that you had to drink out of the colored side.
Fountains, black drinking fountains, publicly. There were white restrooms, there were black restrooms. Everything was very, very segregated.
People who were close to you during when the civil rights movement was happening.
So I've made available a link that will enable you to see more videos, including more of the video that you just saw. Just share just one more with you. This is from another subject that one of our student groups did an oral history for. This lady is 84 years old at the time that this interview was done, and she was hilarious. You'll see what I mean in just a minute.
My first question is, what do you remember about life before integration?
I remember just grew up in a black neighborhood, didn't know anything about white kids going to go to school, white kids. But I was used to white people because my grandmother worked for white people. And that's where I would go in the afternoon when I got off from school. I'd go to the white people's house. And my grandmother would bring me home.
Okay. Do you remember when you first became conscious of your color and what that meant living where you lived at the time? Can you describe the moment?
You know, I really didn't get into, the black white thing My mother was a nurse, and my grandmother worked for the mayor of the town. And so I grew up with white kids, but I didn't go to school with them, but I grew up with them.
So I really didn't like.
No, it didn't. I used to beat them up all the time. There were two boys in it. Of course, I get a whooping too, but I beat them up just like that.
So any 84-year-old woman who remembers the beat down she used to pass out, that was just like worth everything to me. I don't know, for some reason that story just gave me life. But it was amazing in doing these oral histories how many times I heard from students, I didn't know my grandma, and that lady, for example, the young lady was like, I didn't know my grandma was like that because I always knew her as this holy mother of the church. And you know, y'all saw what y'all just saw in that video. So oral histories, as you can tell, it's something I'm very passionate about. We do have a repository of oral histories that have been collected over the years here at TCC. And I just strongly encourage you to create repositories of your own using your students as field assistants to help you do that. So before I transition into a discussion about this other service learning event that I've done with both pre-service teachers and students in my African American history classes, I will just ask Roxy if I've received any questions from anybody.
Absolutely. We'll maybe chat this. Somebody wants to know what program you're using to create the closed caption. So we're gonna go back to that one real quick because but that's a good one. Maybe you can even text that one. Let me see who that person was. But anyway, we're gonna go back to that one. How do we get the local community college to have the same program as you have at TCC?
We can have a discussion about that. That would be a discussion that would involve, I will tell you, people who are several pay grades above me. But in terms of a peer-to-peer interaction, if you have a contact at whatever local college, I don't know where this person is writing in from, I'm going to presume that the person is in Florida, and I know we have people from all over, but if the person is in Florida, if you have a contact at this community, whatever state college or colleges in your area, you can put me in touch with that person and maybe act as a liaison, and we can see what we can do from there.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, do we, and they're asking about the duration of your project.
So I feel as if the K-12 teachers are actually at a little bit more of an advantage than even I am, because in my case, I only have my students for at most 15 weeks. You have your students for the entire year. So you can make your project as long or as contracted as you would need it to be. Maybe this could be a good project, for example, y'all know how you get on the other side of the testing schedule? And I would say that late April to going into May stretch of time where, you know, it's like, okay, what do I do? Do I show movies, you know, or which movie am I going to show? Am I going to show Inside Out or, you know, Frozen 2? If you're not necessarily willing to throw in the towel that early in the year yet, this might be a good project to consider doing that's long-term, that will keep them engaged and will give them something relevant to do at an otherwise dead time of the year.
All right. Let me see. It's a lot. I'm trying to click some of that. Are you able to get to these oral histories? I would love to see them in their entirety.
Like I said, I did share links to them in the Hoover app, and we can also maybe upload them to the website, the task force.
All right, yes, as long as you give them to me, Doc, I'll do that. Okay. Are there any reliable American history textbooks that are truly inclusive of the history and contributions of all American peoples? Even though I'm a science teacher, I would like to add such a book to my classroom library.
Yes, and just because you put me on the spot, I'm not really able to rattle them off for you, but if that person will text or chat me privately, I can provide them with the list.
All right, and we can even upload some of those into your app as well.
Okay.
All right, I think that we're good. I think that we did a good job.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to go on. Now, this second part of my presentation does not include any video links or anything like that. So we will get through this part a little bit more quickly. So again, for 5 years up until January of 2019, I was the teacher education coordinator for TCC, meaning that I was not only the teacher of record, but I was also the field experience coordinator for EDF 1005. And for those of you who are in Florida, who received their education degrees from a college of education in Florida, y'all know all about EDF 1005. It is the required class that all education majors have to take, which essentially more or less is the content that you find on the professional service part, professional practices part of the certification exam. Up until about 2015, it was also required that all education majors take EDF 2085, which is teaching diverse populations. In 2015, they dropped that course as a requirement, but many of our colleges of education still strongly recommend that course for education majors. So as the coordinator of teacher education, those were 2 classes that I taught as a part of my role here at the college. One of the things that I had to do was I had to coordinate field experiences, because in both classes, the students had to actually go into a classroom or an educational environment and render service, so service learning. But I also infused a service learning component into my African American history class, and for that, I found a wonderful partner with a private school. And I will tell you all, private institutions, particularly if you're more interested in having, let's say you're a high school teacher and maybe you want to have your students interact with students who are younger at the elementary or even sort of early elementary level, sometimes finding a private school or a charter school to partner with may allow you more flexibility to actually do something like that. In my case, I found a private school owned and operated by an African-American family here in Tallahassee, whose students are 90-something% African-American, called the Brownsville Preparatory Institute. And to tell you a little bit about Brownsville, and again, I've actually made this presentation available on Whova as well, so I won't read everything that's on here. But Brownsville has as a part of its motto, where 3-year-olds learn how to read. And if you go to their website, you will actually find, guess what? 3-year-old children reading. But the remarkable thing about that is the 3-year-old children who you see reading are typically the students who in some public school districts are already labeled from the time they come into kindergarten because of what they look like and what zip code they live at. So Brownsville is just an amazing success story. I will tell you why I know this so well, because it not only has to do with the fact that I had a very close professional relationship with them, between the students who I've worked with through the teacher ed program. We contributed almost 2,000 hours of volunteer service through nearly 200 students of different races, ethnicities, and genders. And I must share real quickly with you a story about a young man who I had who came from a very affluent, upper middle class white family, very conservative part of the state, from like the Eustis, Florida, Lake County area, those of you that know anything about that part of the state. And he chose to do his mandatory service in Brownsville, and he just felt the need to come back and tell me, true story, Dr. Oliver, it was amazing seeing all these little Black kids engage the way that I'm kind of paraphrasing what he said, engage the way that they were doing, because I grew up all my life hearing from my family that Black kids weren't as smart as white kids. And here was a young man who was getting ready to go into teaching. So can you imagine how important it was for him to have his perception changed and have that exposure? That's why classes like the one that I taught and experiences like this one are so invaluable. The service that my students rendered ranged from assisting in actual classroom instruction through tutoring, through probably the biggest part of what they did was helping this school stage its annual Black History program, which has become something of a local event of sorts. For my education majors, we actually brought the students from Brownsville, about 30 or so, 25 to 30 of them, here on campus for something we call Children's Day, where I actually had my pre-service teacher devise a lesson plan for them to conduct a mini lesson at various stations for the students from Brownsville who came on campus to interact with them. But probably the most, the work that I'm most proud of that my students did with Brownsville was, as I mentioned, this Black History program, which the last full year that we were involved, of course, before COVID shut everything down, was the Black History program of 2019. I had volunteers from both my Teaching Diverse Populations class and my African American History class come in and perform various tasks that the school would have been hard pressed to find volunteers for, because the problem with having parental volunteers for things like this, an event like this, is because of course the parents want to see their own kids. So you might say, well, why didn't the parents volunteer? Well, they're there to see their children, because when I tell you these little 3 and 4 and 5-year-old people were memorizing whole biographical monologues, and I wish I had videos to share with you, but if you go on BPI's website, you can see some of this for yourself. But they're memorizing whole biographical monologues on notable African Americans from history. And the particular year that I do have pictures of, their theme, and each year there's a theme that they focus on, and the theme for 2019 was African Americans in STEM. Now, do y'all see, I mean, all these children are adorable, aren't they? I mean, so far as what you can tell, but y'all focus on this one here, because this young man was Benjamin Banneker. That's my son. And he was Benjamin Banneker, and I mean, they had this whole play that they staged, and the name of the play was called Black to the Future. And so he, you know, he in his role as Benjamin Banneker had built this time machine, and he took, you know, travelers on a journey through various stages of American history to show all the ways in which African Americans contributed in the STEM fields. My students helped the children with rehearsal. My students helped the children with the actual staging the day of the program. And the way that I incentivized them was they could either do work with this, or they could take a 7-page midterm exam. So which one do y'all think they picked? So there are different things that you can do to incentivize them. Roxy, there's a Gloria Hall has raised her hand. So can we unmute her so that I can entertain her question?
Let me try to, okay, you said Gloria Hall?
Yes.
It's a lot of us on here, so you know I gotta kind of find it.
Okay, maybe Ms. Hall, can they unmute themselves?
Nope.
Okay. Ms. Hall, can you chat your question, or were you able to find her?
No, I can't. You said Gloria Hall? I don't see her. She
Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Hall, can you chat your question? Can you put your question in the chat box, and we'll address it?
Or the question. Let me see. She can actually ask a question, Dr. Oliver.
Okay. If you can like type out your question, Roxy can bring it to my attention, because the raising hand feature doesn't really work that well when it's this many of us.
Right.
Okay, another thing that I did in partnership with Brownsville, aside from helping them stage their Black History program, is something that I call the History Alive project. And this one was a really cool project because the first thing that I did, and again, this was language that I took from the actual syllabus when I was introducing this project to them. I said, you ever wonder what real historians do? I brought in an example of my major professor, Dr. Maxine Jones from Florida State University. She was one of the principal historians who led the historic investigation behind the 1922 Rosewood Massacre here in Florida. And it's because of the work that she and other historians did that they brought to the attention of the legislature that was instrumental in bringing about the closest thing to reparations we ever got in this country. The survivors and descendants of this 1922 act of terror at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan, where they essentially destroyed an entire town on false allegations of the rape of a white woman. They were able to secure those reparations in large part because of the work that this decorated historian did. So I brought that up, and of course they then went on to make a movie about it. John Singleton back in 1997, great movie if you ever get a chance to watch it. But historians provide the historical context that actually bring those types of instances to bear, whether it's a Hollywood project or something as substantial and consequential as the Rosewood reparations. So having set that context for them, I then say to them, now is your chance to do what real life historians do in bringing research that you do on an assigned historical topic. And in their case, as you can see down here, the highlighted part, it says during the last week of class, your teams will present your final product to a live school age audience at one of our local schools. That local school was Brownsville. So what I actually did is I brought in teams of students. Again, you'd have to adapt this however you can, depending on what school that you are in. But some of my students actually staged little skits. One of my groups did like a puppet show. One of my groups did like a giant book. They did a book on Hidden Figures before Hidden Figures was actually a movie. They talked about the Black women who were behind the success of the space program in the early 60s. And they put it in storybook form, brought their book out to that school and did story time with the kids. Now, two things here. The college kids are like, Dr. Oliver, I know that I'm gonna wait until I'm older to have kids because wow, that's a lot. I mean, they like the kids, but they're also like, ooh, okay. So that's my public service to them, right? But of course, the children are seeing role models who are college students who look like them. And they're thinking that these people are the coolest people they have ever seen in their lives, and they're taking an interest in them. You can't tell me that this does not have long-lasting impacts on the psyches of all parties involved. So to summarize these cross-generational interactions that I've shared various examples of with you this morning, if you look at this Venn diagram, this is really what service learning is all about. It's about melding academic study and community involvement, which is basically at the heart of civic engagement, and giving them practical experiences. That is what service learning is all about. Oral histories are great service learning projects in this respect. Having older students create Black history related content for younger students, think back to that language that we looked at from the actual statute. You know, using instructional materials. You shall use instructional materials. Well, not only are you using instructional materials, but you're creating them, which is really, you know, getting at the heart. I mean, that's like one of the higher levels of synthesis and learning that we can have, these higher order skills that we can have your students do. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but these are college students. Will my K-12 students be able to do this kind of work? I want to direct your attention to this meme that I saw. I thought it was very funny. I made reference to it earlier. You know, when it comes to making TikTok videos, you know, you guys have some Bill Gates and whoever the founder of Facebook and Google and all of these high-tech firms are. You know, they know all about making TikTok videos. Even my 11-year-old, who I forbid from having a TikTok account, knows how to do TikTok. I'm not sure how she learned it because I didn't tell her, but my point is, do not underestimate the acumen and the skills that your students have. My 7-year-old son has been using digital technology since he was 3. They know how to swipe right and swipe left. They know how to do all this stuff. In fact, they'll be teaching you a thing or two. So they might play dumb, like Patrick here, when it comes to when you ask them to use technology for, in this case, distance learning, but any academic person, they may play dumb, but don't let them off the hook, and do not underestimate their abilities, because nobody rises to low expectations. If you set that bar high, they will surprise you. I will finally like to say in closing that service learning is the bridge between the classroom and the real world. And when it comes to implementing FS 1003.42, service learning is a great way and a great vehicle with which to have that occur. Thank you very much for your time. I will now take any questions that anybody has.
I'm going to look at the Q&A for you, Dr. Oliver, and see if we have any other questions. One of the questions was, did you prompt the questions for the interviews? Did you provide any kind of guide?
Yes, I did. And in addition, and this is why I say K-12 teachers actually have an advantage here, because you're with your students longer than I am with mine. So in my case, I actually had to not only continue to teach what I'm supposed to be teaching, but I had to also fit in opportunities to work with my students on this project as well. So I was having to do a lot of outside of class stuff. You all don't necessarily have to do that because you have them over a longer period of time. So I actually did meet with each one of my groups to do status updates and things of that nature, which honestly would be a lot easier for you guys to do than even me.
And the raised hand earlier was that she just wanted to tell you she was just enjoying your presentation. So that's what that was.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Thank you. I just want to say, because I see a comment here from a biology teacher, Miss Jackie Clark.
Okay.
One of the things that I did provide in the resource guide are ideas that came from, I want to say, New York Times. They did an excellent series last year, the 1619 Project, which commemorated the 400th anniversary of the landing of people of African descent on these shores. But they put together a resource learning guide that's multidisciplinary. Okay. And they actually do have ideas in there for teachers of STEM disciplines like math and science. And one of the things that I put together, in the resource guide that you'll see are ways that even math teachers, you can have your students, for example, do a project in which they are graphing the disparities between people who are coming down with COVID-19 versus, vis-a-vis the rest of the population. So it's, African-American history and interest, also married with concepts that you're teaching them in math, like statistics and probability, or graphing, if you're talking about math at the lower level. So there are ways that you can do it.
We have several questions about your video equipment. What did you use? Was it from the college? Did students use their own? What editing? So we have about 3 or 4 questions about the video experience itself.
90% of the videos that my students produce, they did with their phones. Mm. And that's the God honest truth. That's why I said you cannot let these students get off the hook, y'all, because I'm telling y'all, how do y'all think they make them TikTok videos? They use their phones, right? And that's the beauty of a group. And you know, even in the most resource-strapped districts, right? They somehow have money for iPhones and Androids. I'm just saying, I know you know, all of us represent different ends of the spectrum, but they do have access to resources. We just have to encourage them to use it for academic purposes, which incidentally translates into job skills that they can carry with them into the world of work.
All right. Dr. Oliver, and as you know how my mind works, and it's, are there partnerships with colleges in the South or the state doing the same work? So they're basically asking, they're looking to do some of these things, and I know you're giving them a lot of guidance and background. I know you work a lot with African American History Task Force. There may be something that Dr. Oliver may be able to have another extended session where she talks about this, or I'm sure that just stay tuned to your app. There's another way, there you go, to use your app, because there may be some meetup where Dr. Oliver can do some Q&A just about this particular session. And Dr. Oliver and I kind of personally connected.
A little bit.
So I don't think that she's gonna mind what I'm saying, but if you're interested in connecting with Dr. Oliver on this project in particular, go ahead and add that in the chat. Maybe put your, or add it in the app, and then we can get you some information and maybe pull together a virtual session just for that.
And if I may interject, because I know we're running out of time,
Mm-hmm.
Y'all, your administrators will be all over something like this, because this will generate so much good publicity and goodwill for your school from the community. In my case, I actually had the president of my college sit in on my classes the day that my students were screening their videos. And, you know, and he was just simply blown away. Now, he didn't offer me a raise on the spot. Boy, wouldn't that have been nice? But anything that makes administration look good. I mean, if you've been in education longer than 2 months, you know that if you make your administration looks good, they will love you forever. Of course, you got to do your job, but y'all know what I'm saying.
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and throw out my email address for those wanting to make contact. I am on LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, you can contact me on LinkedIn as well, Andrea Howard Oliver. But my email address is Oliver A, that's Oliver A, at tcc.fl.edu. Oliver A at tcc.fl.edu. And my personal business phone number, if you want to reach out that way, is 850-888-2146.
Right.
850-888-2146. Thank you.
Dr. Oliver, you've been amazing. Maybe Camille can put this in the chat. She's actually right now doing a series for women. She's doing a series for women for civic engagement. And it's been a powerful series. You can visit shenergize.com to register for that free webinar series, SHENERGIZE.com. I know Dr. Austin's a part of it, and she's been coming. Again, you get Dr. Oliver live via that, and so much information in history, SHENERGIZE.com. Dr. Austin, are you ready? Are you ready? Thank you so much, Dr. Oliver, for all the information and all that you are doing to be very creative in the city where you live to impact the education and learning of your students and the students that your students interact with and your college as a whole. It's really a triple win, a win-win-win scenario. So thank you for all that you do and for being a part. Dr. Austin.